Chapter 8. Nothing less of evil. As Isaac sat with Ruth in the house of Obadiah Marks, officers Hamoud and Coombs sat in their cruiser on Kenneth Street, outside the house of Joshua. It was a damp, chill night, and they were cold. Coombs wanted the windows closed to keep warm, but the glass was steaming up. "I can't see anything," Hamoud complained. He lowered the window and looked up at the house. There was only one street light on the cul-de-sac, and it did little to light the scene. The house was partially concealed by the trees that surrounded it, and the rest was hidden by long, dark shadows. He looked at the windows, but they were black. "Why the hell are we here?" said Hamoud. "If there was someone moving about in that house, we wouldn't see them anyway. They could be right there now, staring at us, and we wouldn't know it." He looked at the windows again, and the thought that someone may be watching them caused him to shiver. He picked up the radio again to take his mind off that thought. "Hamoud to base."
"Go ahead."
"Are you sure we can't leave? I mean, it's not exactly some rich guy's home we're guarding here."
"Detective Goldstein's orders. If I was you, I'd do exactly as he says. He has his reasons, I'm sure."
"Well, I wish somebody would tell me what they are. It would make things a lot easier to bear."
"Don't worry. We'll send out a relief at midnight."
"Okay, Jody. Hamoud out." He put down the radio, and Coombs looked at him. "I heard Goldstein's been to a triple homicide over at the university. He thinks it's linked with this case." "Well, he's been known to be wrong before." "Yeah, but I got a feeling that maybe he's right this time. Did you see all those old manuscripts? Ibbotson said some of that stuff was thousands of years old, right back to the beginning of civilization." "I saw them," Hamoud said. "The look on that old guy's face, I tell you, man, this place spooks me. All these old people in these run-down houses. I hope I don't end up living out here, dumped and forgotten." "You'll be lucky if you live that long," Hamoud said. "Don't say that. I was just kidding." "Well, you shouldn't kid about stuff like that." "Lighten up, won't you? Come on, let's get out and take another look." "We just been." "That was over an hour ago." "You go. I'll do it next time, and you can catch a few wings." "You're kidding, right?" said Hamoud. "Out here, I wouldn't close my eyes for a second." He opened the car door, stepped out onto the street, and looked up at the house. He shivered, but wasn't sure if that was the cold or something else. Hamoud shook himself and cursed his weakness. He pulled out his flashlight and walked over to the path beside the house. The shadows were everywhere, some moving as the wind caught the trees. He turned on the flashlight and nothing happened. He banged it a couple of times with his hand, and eventually a weak beam shot out. Stepping forward, Hamoud reached the door on the side of the house. It looked secure, and the tape was still in place. He continued on along the path to the back of the house, to a window that looked in at the dead man's apartment. Halfway along the path, he thought he heard something behind him. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. He stood there and waited, but he heard nothing except the beating of his own heart. He turned around again and continued down the path to the back of the house. It was there that he saw the footprint in the mud, and the plywood that had been set across the window lying on the ground. The window was wide open. Hamoud shone the flashlight on the large footprint and let out a sharp breath of shock. It wasn't human. He pulled out his gun and looked in. It was all dark. He shone his flashlight across the room, his gun ready. Nothing, just shadows. "Come out with your hands up," he said. But again, nothing. He stood there for another minute, his flashlight held out in front of him, the gun tight in his hands, but nothing. He began to feel the darkness behind him, began to feel it creep around him. He tried to control the fear. He got his mind working. Better call this in, he thought, and he relaxed his stance and turned around. There was nothing behind him, just darkness. He looked down at the bars, iron bars that he realized had been set over the window for security. They had been ripped out from the cement, and someone, or something, had bent them almost in half. My God! Now he was scared. He backed along the path, his gun still ready, though his hand was trembling. He moved quickly back to the front of the house. The one remaining streetlight was out. There was just the weak beam of his flashlight in the inky darkness. He moved quickly back to the cruiser. Why didn't Coombs put on the searchlight? It was standard operating procedure when there were no streetlights. Had he fallen asleep? For a moment, Hamoud's fear was replaced with anger. He scrambled to the car door, opened it, and climbed in. "Coombs, are you sleeping?" Coombs wasn't there. Just a mess of blood and bone in the seat where Coombs sat. Hamoud twisted away from the corpse. Coombs had been attacked by some animal, a giant grizzly, or a lion, or a pack of wolves, had ripped him apart. Hamoud shone his flashlight about erratically. He saw a shadow on the other side of the road. He leaned out of the window and fired his gun. 6 shots, one after the other. Climbed out of the car and moved into the shadows, his gun held out in front of him, over to where he'd fired. But there was nothing there. He ran back to the car. Coombs was in the driver's seat. He opened the door and quickly saw that there was no way he could drive the cruiser, for the mess of Coombs was so tangled and spread over the pedals and gear stick. He heard the creature, a deep growl. He ran around the car and got back into the passenger seat. He tried to think. The radio. He pulled it up, his hand shaking uncontrollably. "This is Hamoud. Officer down." Static. An ear-piercing roar filled the quiet street. "For God's sake, Jody!" Static. "This is Hamoud!" he screamed. "Jody, for God's sake!" He came out of the darkness. Its speed was something he could not comprehend. He raised his gun quickly and fired.